Hey, what's up YouTube? In this video, I want to talk you through the things I do when I exercise. And I distinguish exercise from activity, like a sport or just everyday activity, which you're doing for the sake of it. For example, right now my main activity is striking, MMA. So I'll go to boxing class or go to MMA class and then just focus on learning the technique and practicing. Yeah, I'm getting a workout, but I don't call that exercise. Exercise is when I'm going to the gym to specifically do things to improve the structure and function of my organism. And what we're going to focus on here today is particularly the musculature as distinct from like my cardiovascular function. I'm talking about my muscular mechanical function. What am I doing to increase the structure and function of it? Well, first and foremost, I'm doing my body fluency techniques to improve the structure. So if you hang out with me all day, you'll see me do stuff like this, kind of feeling through different blockages in my musculature and getting it more connected. And that's kind of low grade throughout the day, but that's adjusting the structure. What about the function? What's the actual function of the musculature? And this is where, in my model, I have these basic functions of your musculature. We have stabilize, accelerate, and recoil as the primary functions. And then secondary functions, I have absorb and bounce. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different exercises I do and how those elements play into it. So first, stabilization. This is the most common type of exercise you see in the gym. Like 95% of what people do is stabilizing. And stabilizing is just basically if you have either your body or like a weight, and if you're just right now I'm stabilizing this object. There's a load, I'm stabilizing it. Even without the weight, right now, just standing, I'm stabilizing, right? And then if I'm slowly squatting down, then I'm also practicing my stabilizing. So if you're doing anything constant velocity, which is either still or moving constantly, velocity like this, then you're not really training anything but stability. And I think people overtrain stability function, and also they're doing it in the wrong dimension. So if I'm doing a handstand, then like I'm stabilizing, yeah, but I'm also compressing my wrist joint, and I'll probably get injuries there. Most of the things people are doing aren't super useful for stability in the grand scheme of things. The best thing for stabilizing function is getting a pulley machine and then attaching it to your different limbs. So for example, I'll attach it to my ankle and then have that thing shoot very precisely up through my musculature. I'm finding all the muscles to be activated and then recruiting it through a movement like a run movement or like another kind of kick movement. And I'll do those kind of slow things and just focus on recruiting all my musculature. That's very effective stabilization training. So that's a big part of my training. Then we have acceleration. So acceleration is now I'm either taking my body or taking an object and then trying to explode it as fast as I can, right? So if I had a weight, for example, I'm doing acceleration, instead of just doing like a slow curl pull-up, first off, I'm trying to do full chains, not isolated like most people do. But when, for example, I can do a full chain, I come down here, and one part of my body is fully shortened up, and then I'll break this thing in front of my garage door opener, and then as hard as I can, I'll explode. I can go harder if I was afraid. As hard as I can, I'll explode up, and I'll probably say heavier weight. Faster explosions. My goal there is to be explosive, to generate as much force as possible through the movement. Without a weight, I can be jumping as hard as I can. I can also be throwing things. So, for example, here's like a 20-pound slam ball, and I can again focus on getting all my chains nice and connected, and then I hold it, and then I find all the parts I want to recruit, and as hard as I can, I accelerate that ball down to the ground. So, and I can get in a variety of directions. So that's acceleration. Then the final one, which very few people train, is recoil. So recoil is when your tissues, your soft tissue fibers elongate, and then in their elongation, they generate elastic potential energy, right? So if I swing my arm back like this with this weight, when it's moving here, it has kinetic energy, right? So here's kinetic energy, and then if I, contract my muscles, then when it goes back and slows down, that kinetic energy transfers into elastic potential energy into these muscles that are getting long in my arm and shoulder, right? So this right here is training my elasticity here. And this is me kind of passive, more or less passive recoil. And it's not just my arm chain. I'm trying to get a chain going all the way down to my opposite foot. So right now, I'm feeling this and driving this from my quad muscles on my left side. Actually, this is my right hand. Oh, I actually don't work out here often. But anyways, boom. So that's the recoil function. So if I get like a weight and I'm swinging, and then again you can swing in different directions, and that's your recoil function. And what happens is that when you do those types of movements, your fascia will start to develop around those movements so that the fascia actually adds to the recoil. You also get recoil if you're like shadow boxing, and when my arm goes out like this, is lengthening, and then there's a recoil back, and then I can use that energy to push out my other one. So recoil in boxing as well, and striking. Then the next one we mentioned were shock absorption. So another thing I would do, though I wouldn't recommend people do this until they've got a high level of fluency, is standing on, it's like a chair or something, and then dropping to the ground with a neutral posture, so all my muscles are in a neutral position, and then hitting the ground and just absorbing that shock through my entire musculature. And the reason why you need to be fluent to do this is because if you're not, the force of the impact will go into your joints, maybe your ankle, your knee, and that's not good. I want minimal impact in my joints, 0 ideally, and have all that force distributed through all my muscles. So you start very low, and then just do these little shock jumps. And what I'm doing there is I'm timing the tension of my whole body to just capture all of that, and then this puts like a shock. And the reason why it's a secondary thing is really you're just combining acceleration and stabilization together. So if I'm dropping, I'm going a certain speed, and then I quickly take that to 0. That's acceleration in the negative, deceleration. And then I'm stopping to a point of stability. So that's what that type of jump is. Now, that's just me stopping. What I can also do when I do that is that there's going to be a little bit of a elastic spring in my tissue, particularly in my tendons as well, that I can then use and harness to bounce myself back into the ground. So you see those like Maasai jumpers who can like pop up on the ground like pogo sticks. That's what's going on there. They're very fluent and they highly trained this bounce functionality. So they're keeping themselves in a neutral kind of give position, and then when they hit the ground, they tense up a bit and boing, and then recapture all that energy and spring back up. So that's a really important function because that's the fundamental function that jogging is. So jogging, what you're doing is you're landing on one foot and then pulsing, neutralizing everything so that energy springs you back up into the air. And if you're a bit lean forward, then you move forward, right? So that's to jog. So I'll do a little bit of light jogging as well. Again, mostly just to train my springiness and my balance function. And then finally, you kind of combine all these things. Actually, before I do that, I forgot to. I got this glove here, this boxing glove. We just talked about the absorption and bouncing from our feet, but I also can do it with my hands. I don't actually see anyone do this. I'm sure people do it, but I don't actually see anyone train this as much. Usually people just train on a heavy bag, which is also good. You're training that bounce there as well. But really just the shock absorption on a punch. So if I hit, can you see this pole here? Yeah. So one thing I'll do a lot is I will punch, you know, like a cross or a jab, and then hit like a hard wall, like a matted wall, or actually I don't need a mat, you can do a hard wall if you have your glove on, and then, but then hit it, and then the goal is to hit it, and then try to get a fluent, stable connection all the way to the ground. So if you're not fluent when you hit it, some place is gonna give, like your shoulder or some place in your back or body or whatever, but I should be able to get a stable, solid rock force from my feet to the thing. So I'll work on a wall and just, you know, I can feel I had give here, so I kind of push on the wall, adjust it, get grounded, planted. And that's the same thing as doing, but now it's coming from the top of your body rather than from the bottom. So that pulsing I find is really good. And while I'm doing all these things, I'm just trying to improve and in between adjust things so I get more and more fluent. So when I do this, the shock absorption, I do it, feel where I'm weak. I do one of my fluency techniques, get things connected up better, do it again, and I got a more stable punch. Or I'm you know, trying to accelerate a weight in some direction. I feel where I'm weak, do a thing, accelerate even more because now I have more muscles integrated. Final thing is kind of combining everything. So if I have this dumbbell in my hand right now, I can combine all these things where I'm like, I can do, for example, we talked about the recoil here, but I can time the recoil with acceleration. So instead of just doing like a kind of light recoil, I can do as hard as I can to snap back. You know, so, and then I can also put things together. So maybe I throw this one as hard as I can this way, and then take that energy and recoil it back. So I'm like, you know, so that's when you start playing around with momentum, that's where things really start to get dynamic. But all those same elements are there, you know, so I can even do like a, like stuff like that. That's me bouncing, right? So I'm here, bounce, recoil, bounce. And that's now becoming more functional. This is more what you're actually doing in a real activity, like a sport or real life, like I'm hunting or getting hunted. You know, you're running, sprinting, and juking and jiving and fighting, like fight and flight. Those things contain all these elements. If I'm sprinting, what I'm doing is each time I hit the ground, I'm trying to get a bounce going. Each time, and then when my legs are outstretched, you know, in a full gait of a run, and I'm like, when my leg's out in front, the bottom of my leg is getting lengthened and creating potential energy, and the back of my leg is creating potential energy as well. So you got the recoil function in there. You're hitting the ground for the rebound or bouncing function. Every time you hit the ground, you're accelerating. So you have that acceleration function as well. And then of course, everything's based on you being stable. Otherwise you just kind of collapse. And then for fighting, same deal. You're accelerating your fist or your leg. You're accelerating it as hard as you can. And then maybe I throw a jab and then come back. So maybe there's a recoil, or you're doing a kind of overhand. I have a recoil there. When I actually make contact with the person, then I'm doing the absorption, because the more I can push through, then the more force I put into that person. And then, you know, I'm doing the bounce with my footwork, you know, and I can take it all together. I remember I watched Sean O'Malley when he knocked out Aljo Sterling. You can see him backing up, and then he cuts to the side, and then he bounces back at him. He's backing up, and then bounces back. And that bounce is then also being put into his attack. You know, so this is true athleticism when you're combining all these functions. So that's why I'm training at the gym. And the final thought I say is that I never train to failure. I always train to fluency, which means that I'm doing these things, experimenting, having fun, feeling where I'm off, where there's blockages or gaps in my network, fixing it, doing it a bit more. But I'm never going to failure. I'm never really sore, but I'm always getting more and more athletic, more and more functional. And that makes more sense to me. The standard training approach is just put yourself in stabilization activities in a very limited ranges of movement patterns, and then hold it there as long as you possibly can until you hit failure, and then be sore all day the next day, and then get hypertrophy, big muscles, but then they're isolated and then not functioning. Eventually you get injuries. That's not it. That's not it. And again, for me, I cross-reference kind of evolutionary first principles, and I'm like thinking about someone holding a plank until they pass out, and I'm like, I've never seen an animal hold themselves in tension for an extended period of time. Just like imagine like a monkey just doing a plank, right? They're constantly moving, swinging. What's that? Recoil, bouncing off of trees, right? They're constantly doing stuff. But the thing about recoil and bounce particularly is that they're all about conserving energy. Acceleration, you're generating energy, but you don't want to generate, and stability, you also have to maintain energy. Those two are energy intensive, whereas recoil and bounce are recycling energy. So most of athletic activity is actually recycling the energy that you've already generated. And that is what I think is the key principle missing in how people approach conventional exercise. So hopefully that was interesting and useful and makes sense. Like and subscribe, and leave any comments if you have any questions.